The shackles burned against Isolde's wrists as the soldiers dragged her through the cobblestone streets, their iron grip leaving bruises that bloomed purple against her pale skin. Behind her, the village of Thornwick disappeared into morning mist, its thatched roofs and smoking chimneys becoming mere shadows in her peripheral vision. She had called this place home for 3 years, long enough to forget the constant ache of being unwanted, long enough to believe she might finally belong somewhere. That illusion had shattered the moment Elder Matthias discovered her secret in the market square, when desperate hunger had driven her to transmute a handful of pebbles into bread. Forbidden magic. The words echoed in her mind like a funeral bell, each repetition driving deeper into her consciousness. She had broken the cardinal law of the 7 kingdoms, the decree that had stood for over 2 centuries since the Great Purge. Magic wielders were to be executed on sight, their bodies burned to prevent their tainted essence from corrupting the earth. Yet here she was, still breathing, still walking, still feeling the autumn wind cut through her threadbare cloak. The lead soldier, a grizzled man with scars crisscrossing his weathered face, glanced back at her with something that might have been pity. "Keep moving, witch," he muttered, but his voice lacked the venom she had expected. "We've got leagues to cover before nightfall." Isolde stumbled over a loose stone, her bound hands preventing her from catching herself properly. The soldier steadied her with surprising gentleness, his calloused fingers barely grazing her elbow before he pulled away as if burned. She wondered what orders they had received, what strange directive kept her alive when protocol demanded her immediate death. The uncertainty gnawed at her more than fear ever could. As they traveled northward, the landscape began to change with each passing mile. The rolling hills of Thornwick's countryside gave way to craggy peaks that pierced the sky like broken teeth. Ancient pines replaced the oak groves she knew, their branches heavy with snow despite the season being merely late autumn. The temperature dropped steadily, each breath becoming visible in small puffs of vapor that dissipated quickly in the thin air. "Where are you taking me?" Isolde finally asked when they stopped to rest beside a frozen stream. Her voice came out rougher than intended, hoarse from hours of silence. The scarred soldier looked up from where he was refilling his water skin, his dark eyes unreadable. "To Prince Kieran's domain," he said simply. "The Ice Prince has requested your presence." A chill ran down Isolde's spine that had nothing to do with the mountain cold. Everyone knew the stories of the Ice Prince, though few claimed to have seen him personally. He ruled the northernmost kingdom from a palace carved from a single glacier, commanding an army of frost-touched warriors who felt neither pain nor mercy. Some said he was more legend than man, a creature born from winter itself. Others whispered that he had once been human, but had sacrificed his humanity for power over the eternal snows. "Why would he want me?" she pressed, though part of her already suspected the answer. "That's not for us to know," the soldier replied, but his eyes drifted to her hands where faint silver scars marked her palms, the marks of a transmutation mage, visible only to those who knew what to look for. "Orders came down from the capital 3 days ago. Any magic wielder found in the southern provinces was to be brought north alive. You're the first we've encountered." The implications settled over her like a burial shroud. The Ice Prince was collecting magic wielders for some purpose, gathering them like specimens for an unknown experiment. She thought of the stories her grandmother had told her as a child, tales of powerful mages who had been enslaved by ambitious rulers, forced to use their abilities for conquest and domination. The idea of becoming another tyrant's weapon made her stomach turn. They resumed their journey as shadows lengthened across the mountain pass. With each step northward, the air grew thinner and more bitter, until Isolde's lungs burned with each inhalation. Frost began to form on her eyelashes despite the early hour, and her fingers went numb inside her worn mittens. The soldiers seemed unaffected by the cold, their breathing steady and their movements sure-footed on the increasingly treacherous path. By evening, they reached a way station built into the mountainside, its walls carved directly from the living rock. A handful of other travelers huddled around a central fire pit, their faces gaunt with exhaustion and cold. Isolde was given a bowl of thin broth and a corner to sleep in, though the stone floor offered little comfort. She lay awake listening to the wind howl through cracks in the walls, wondering if this would be her last night of relative freedom. The second day brought them to the border of the Ice Prince's territory, marked by towering crystal formations that jutted from the earth like frozen lightning. The very air seemed to shimmer here, dancing with particles of ice that caught the pale sunlight and threw it back in prismatic rainbows. Isolde had never seen anything so beautiful or so terrifying. This was magic on a scale she could barely comprehend, the very landscape reshaped by someone's will. "Welcome to the eternal winter," the scarred soldier said, and for the first time, his voice carried a note of reverence. "The prince's domain extends from here to the sunless sea, 1,000 leagues of ice and snow that never melts." They passed through a checkpoint manned by guards whose armor gleamed like polished silver. These soldiers moved with inhuman precision, their faces hidden behind helmets carved to resemble wolves' heads. They examined the papers the scarred soldier presented, their attention lingering on Isolde with an intensity that made her skin crawl. One of them spoke in a language she didn't recognize, the words sharp and guttural like breaking ice. The path beyond the checkpoint wound through a forest of trees that had been transformed into living sculptures. Each trunk, branch, and needle was encased in ice so clear it looked like glass, creating a cathedral of frozen beauty that stretched as far as the eye could see. No birds sang here, no small creatures rustled in the underbrush. The only sounds were their footsteps crunching on packed snow and the occasional crack of expanding ice. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Isolde began to feel a strange tingling in her bones, as if the magic in her blood was responding to something in the environment. The sensation grew stronger with each mile, until it felt like electricity dancing beneath her skin. She had never experienced anything like it, and the intensity both thrilled and frightened her. Whatever power ruled this land, it was calling to the magic within her in a way that felt almost intimate. On the third day, the palace came into view, and Isolde's breath caught in her throat. It rose from the mountain peak like a frozen tsunami, its spires and battlements carved from pure ice that gleamed blue-white in the afternoon sun. The structure defied conventional architecture, flowing and organic in its design, as if it had grown rather than been built. Bridges of crystallized snow connected tower to tower, their surfaces so transparent they seemed to float in midair. "The Glacier Crown," the scarred soldier said quietly. "Seat of the Ice Prince for over a century." As they approached the main gates, Isolde noticed that the very air around the palace seemed alive with power. Snowflakes fell upward in spiraling columns, defying gravity, while aurora-like lights danced across the walls despite the daylight hour. Guards flanked the entrance, their weapons wreathed in frost that never melted. These were not ordinary men, she realized with growing unease. They were something else entirely, creatures touched by magic until they became extensions of their master's will. The gates opened at their approach without any visible signal, revealing a courtyard paved with mirrors of black ice. Isolde's reflection stared back at her from 1,000 different angles, multiplied and distorted until she felt dizzy looking down. At the center of the courtyard stood a fountain that flowed with what looked like liquid starlight, its surface rippling with colors that had no names. "This is where we part ways," the scarred soldier said, removing her shackles with hands that trembled slightly. "You're to go with them now." He gestured toward a group of servants who had emerged from the palace's main entrance, their movements silent as falling snow. Isolde rubbed her freed wrists, feeling circulation return to her hands in painful tingles. "What happens to me now?" The soldier's scarred face softened slightly, and for a moment, he looked almost paternal. "I don't know, girl. But I'll say this, you're stronger than you think you are. Don't let them break that strength." Before she could respond, the servants surrounded her, their touch gentle but implacable as they guided her toward the palace entrance. She looked back once to see the scarred soldier and his men already retreating toward the gates, their duty complete. Whatever came next, she would face it alone. The interior of the palace was even more magnificent than its exterior, if such a thing were possible. Corridors stretched in impossible directions, their walls adorned with murals that seemed to move when viewed from the corner of one's eye. Chandeliers of frozen flame hung from vaulted ceilings, casting light that was simultaneously warm and cold. The servants led her through room after room, each more elaborate than the last, until she lost all sense of direction. Finally, they stopped before a pair of doors carved with intricate frost patterns that depicted scenes of winter hunts and ice storms. The servants gestured for her to enter, their faces hidden beneath hoods of white fur. Isolde hesitated for only a moment before pushing the doors open and stepping into the chamber beyond. The room was circular, its walls lined with bookshelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. A fire burned in the central hearth, its flames dancing blue and silver rather than the usual orange and red. Comfortable chairs were arranged around the fireplace, and a tea service sat on a low table, steam rising from the delicate porcelain cups. It was not what she had expected from a prison cell. "Please, sit," a voice said from the shadows near the bookshelves. "You must be exhausted from your journey." Isolde spun toward the sound, her heart hammering against her ribs. A figure stepped into the firelight, and she found herself face to face with the Ice Prince himself. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps only a few years older than her own 23 years, with sharp cheekbones and skin so pale it seemed translucent. His hair was white as fresh snow, falling in waves to his shoulders, and his eyes were the color of winter storms, gray with flecks of silver that seemed to shift and swirl like clouds. But it was the aura of cold that surrounded him that made her breath catch. Even at a distance of several feet, she could feel the chill radiating from his body like an invisible barrier. Frost formed on the nearby surfaces wherever his attention lingered, and when he moved, the air shimmered with ice crystals. "You are Isolde of Thornwick," he said, and it was not a question. His voice was like wind over frozen lakes, beautiful and haunting but utterly without warmth. The transmutation made, she turned stones to bread in the market square. "I was hungry," she said, lifting her chin defiantly despite her fear. "I didn't hurt anyone." A smile ghosted across his lips, though it held no humor. "No, you didn't, which is precisely why you're here instead of in a pyre." He gestured toward one of the chairs. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss." Isolde remained standing, her hands clenched at her sides. "I'm your prisoner. You don't need to pretend otherwise. Are you?" Prince Kieran tilted his head, studying her with those storm-colored eyes. "The doors aren't locked. The servants won't stop you if you try to leave. Of course, you'd freeze to death within an hour of stepping outside the palace walls, but that's your choice to make." The casual way he mentioned her likely death sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the ambient cold. This man, if he truly was a man, possessed a cruelty that was all the more frightening for being delivered with such calm courtesy. "What do you want from me?" she asked, finally settling into the chair closest to the fire. The flames provided little warmth, but their light was comforting in the vast space. Prince Kieran poured tea from the service, his movements precise and economical. The liquid that filled her cup was pale gold and smelled of winter flowers she couldn't identify. "I want you to help me save my kingdom," he said simply, offering her the cup. Isolde accepted the tea but didn't drink, studying his face for signs of deception. "Save it from what?" "From dying," he replied, settling into the chair across from her. "My land is cursed, Isolde. The eternal winter that gives me power is also killing everything it touches. The soil grows barren, the rivers freeze solid, and my people are becoming like me." "Like you? Like you?" He held up one hand, and Isolde watched in fascination as frost spread across his palm, forming delicate patterns that looked almost like lace. Cold, empty, incapable of feeling warmth or joy or love. They're becoming ice sculptures in human form, beautiful but lifeless. "And you think I can help because I have magic?" "I think you can help because you understand what it means to be cursed," Prince Kieran said quietly. "You transmute matter, yes, but that's not your true gift. You know what it feels like to be rejected, to be feared for something you cannot control. You know what it means to be alone." His words hit too close to home, and Isolde found herself setting down her teacup with shaking hands. "You don't know anything about me, don't I?" He leaned forward slightly, his intense gaze never leaving her face. "You were born with magic in a world that kills magic wielders. You spent your entire life hiding what you are, moving from place to place whenever someone gets too close to the truth. You've never had a real home, never had anyone who truly accepted you. You're tired of running, tired of being afraid, tired of being alone. Each word was like a knife thrust, precisely aimed at her deepest wounds. Isolde felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back angrily. Stop. You want to belong somewhere, Prince Kieran continued relentlessly. You want to be valued for what you are instead of feared for it. You want to use your abilities to help people instead of hiding them like a shameful secret. I said stop. Isolde surged to her feet, magic crackling around her fingers in silver sparks. The nearest bookshelf trembled, its volumes rearranging themselves according to her emotional turmoil. Prince Kieran watched the display without flinching, though she noticed his knuckles whiten where they gripped his chair's armrests. Impressive, he said calmly. Most transmutation mages can only affect non-living matter. You're manipulating organized information, changing the very structure of knowledge itself. Isolde stared at the rearranged books in shock. She had never done anything like that before, had never even known it was possible. How did you know I could do that? Because I've been watching you for a very long time, Prince Kieran admitted. My agents have tracked your movements across 3 kingdoms, documented every instance of your magic use. You're far more powerful than you realize, Isolde, and power like yours, it comes with a price. It comes with a price. She sank back into her chair, feeling suddenly exhausted. What kind of price? The same kind I pay, he said, and for the first time, his carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. Magic of this magnitude demands sacrifice. For me, it was my ability to feel warmth, to connect with others, to experience joy. For you... He gestured at her hands, where the silver scars were now glowing faintly. For you, it's isolation. The stronger your magic grows, the more dangerous you become to those around you. Eventually, you'll be forced to choose between using your abilities and maintaining any human connections. The truth of his words settled over her like a suffocating blanket. She had always wondered why her magic seemed to push people away. Why even those who initially accepted her eventually grew uncomfortable in her presence. You're saying I'm cursed to be alone. I'm saying we're both cursed, Prince Kieran corrected. And I believe that together, we might be able to break those curses. Isolde looked up at him, studying his face in the firelight. Despite his otherworldly beauty and obvious power, she could see pain lurking in those storm-gray eyes, a loneliness that matched her own. How? There's a theory, he said carefully, that certain types of curses can only be broken by someone with a complementary affliction. Fire melts ice, but ice can also quench fire. Your magic pushes people away because it's too volatile, too warm. Mine pulls them in only to freeze them. Together, we might find balance. Or we might destroy each other, Isolde pointed out. Yes, Prince Kieran agreed with brutal honesty. That's also a possibility, but the alternative is watching our curses consume everything we touch. My kingdom is dying, Isolde. My people are becoming hollow shells of themselves, and you. He paused, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. You're running out of places to run. She wanted to deny it, to argue that she could keep moving indefinitely, but they both knew it wasn't true. The world was getting smaller for people like her, but hiding places fewer and farther between. Eventually, she would be caught, and when that happened, she would face the pyre alone and unmourned. What exactly are you proposing? She asked finally. Prince Kieran rose from his chair and moved to one of the tall windows that looked out over his frozen domain. Stay here, work with me to understand our curses and find a way to break them. In exchange, I'll give you something you've never had, a place where your magic is valued instead of feared. And if we can't break the curses, then at least we won't face our fates alone, he said without turning around. Sometimes, that's the most we can hope for. Isolde joined him at the window, careful to maintain some distance between them. The view was breathtaking, endless expanses of snow and ice stretching to the horizon, broken only by the occasional stand of crystal trees or frozen waterfall. It was beautiful in its desolation, like a world carved from moonlight and dreams. Your kingdom, she said softly. It's dying because of the eternal winter? Everything dies here eventually, Prince Kieran confirmed. The cold preserves things for a time, but preservation isn't the same as life. Without warmth, without change, without the possibility of growth, existence becomes merely a prolonged death. Something in his voice made her look at him more closely. She noticed the way he held himself apart even when speaking to her, the careful distance he maintained from everything around him. How long have you been alone? Truly alone? He considered the question. Since I was 16 and first came into my full power. That was when the curse manifested completely. Before that, I at least had the illusion of connection. What happened when you were 16? Prince Kieran's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I killed someone I loved, he said simply. Not intentionally, but intentions matter little to the dead. The admission hung between them like a physical presence, heavy with grief and regret. Isolde found herself wanting to reach out to him, to offer some gesture of comfort, but she recognized the danger in such impulses. Two cursed individuals trying to console each other might only amplify their afflictions. I'm sorry, she said instead. Are you? He finally turned to look at her, and she was startled by the raw pain in his eyes. Most people would say I deserved it, that it was justice for having magic in the first place. Most people are fools, Isolde replied firmly. No one deserves to be punished for something they can't control. Something shifted in Prince Kieran's expression, a subtle warming that was gone almost before she noticed it. Perhaps that's why you're here, he murmured. Perhaps you're the first person in 8 years to see me as something other than a monster. You're not a monster, Isolde said, surprised by her own certainty. You're hurt, and you're dangerous, but you're not a monster. Monsters don't feel guilt for the pain they cause, don't they? Prince Kieran smiled, but there was no joy in it. I've caused a great deal of pain, Isolde. My very existence is slowly killing everyone in my kingdom. If that doesn't make me a monster, what does? Choice, she said firmly. Monsters choose to cause harm. You're trying to prevent it. They stood in silence for a long moment, watching snow fall beyond the crystal windows. Finally, Prince Kieran spoke again. Will you stay? Will you help me try to break these curses? Isolde thought of the scarred soldier's words about her inner strength, of the rearranged books that proved her magic was still growing, of the endless years of running and hiding that stretched behind her. Then she thought of the pain in the prince's eyes and the dying kingdom beyond the palace walls. I'll stay, she said quietly, but I have conditions. Name them. I want to understand exactly what I'm agreeing to. I want to know the full extent of your curse, the history of how it began, and what you believe it will take to break it. I want honest answers, not careful evasions. Prince Kieran nodded slowly. Agreed. What else? I want access to your library. If I'm going to help solve this, I need to research curse-breaking, magical theory, anything that might be relevant. Of course. The library is yours to use as you see fit. And I want your word that if I decide to leave, you won't stop me. Prince Kieran hesitated for the first time since their conversation began. I can't promise you'll be able to survive the journey back to civilized lands. That's my risk to take. Very well, he agreed reluctantly. You have my word that I won't prevent your departure if you choose to go. Isolde extended her hand toward him, then caught herself before making contact. The gesture felt absurd given their circumstances, but she needed some way to seal their agreement. Then we have a bargain. Prince Kieran looked at her outstretched hand with something that might have been longing. We do, he said softly. And Isolde? Thank you. Don't thank me yet, she replied, lowering her hand. You might regret this decision before we're through. I already regret most of the decisions I've made in my life, Prince Kieran said. At least this one offers the possibility of redemption. As if summoned by his words, the silent servants returned to escort Isolde to her chambers. Prince Kieran assured her that dinner would be brought to her room and that she should rest from her journey. Tomorrow, he promised, they would begin their work in earnest. Her quarters were located in the eastern wing of the palace, accessible through corridors lined with windows that offered stunning views of the surrounding mountains. The suite itself was more luxurious than any accommodation she had ever experienced, with a sitting room, bedroom, and private bath all heated by fireplaces that burned with the same blue-white flame she had seen in the prince's study. The bed was enormous, its frame carved from what looked like a single piece of ice that somehow felt warm to the touch. Thick furs and silk coverlets promised comfort against the eternal cold, while a writing desk near the window provided a space for research and contemplation. Fresh clothing had been laid out for her, garments of white and silver that seemed designed to complement the palace's aesthetic. After the servants departed, Isolde explored her new domain with growing amazement. The bathroom featured a tub carved from translucent stone that filled itself with steaming water at her approach. Shelves held toiletries that smelled of winter flowers and clean snow. Even the mirror above the wash basin was enchanted, its surface rippling like water when she wasn't looking directly at it. She had just finished bathing when a soft knock announced the arrival of her dinner. The meal was brought by a different servant than those who had escorted her, a young woman whose face was partially visible beneath her hood. Unlike the others, this servant spoke when setting down the tray. "Welcome to the Glacier Crown, my lady," she said in accented but clear speech. "I am Vera, and I'll be attending to your needs during your stay." "Thank you, Vera," Isolde replied, grateful for human interaction that didn't carry the weight of magical intensity. "How long have you worked here?" Vera's hand stilled momentarily as she arranged the dishes. 3 years, my lady. I came from the village of Eisenhof before the snows claimed it." "The snows claimed it?" "The eternal winter spreads a little farther each year," Vera explained quietly. "Eisenhof was abandoned when the cold became too much to bear. Many of us came to serve in the palace rather than flee south." Isolde felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature. "How many villages have been abandoned?" 7 in the past 3 years, Vera said, her voice carefully neutral. "The prince provides for the Prenba, refugees, but... She trailed off, perhaps realizing she was speaking too freely. "But he can't provide warmth," Isolde finished softly. Vera nodded, her expression sad. "He tries, my lady. Prince Kieran is not the monster some claim him to be, but his very presence brings the killing cold. The closer you are to him, the more you feel it." After Vera departed, Isolde sat by the window with her dinner, processing this new information. The prince had described his curse in abstract terms, but Vera's words painted a clearer picture. The eternal winter wasn't just affecting the palace, it was expanding, consuming entire communities in its relentless advance. The weight of so many lives hanging in the balance made her stomach clench with anxiety. She spent the evening examining the books that had been provided for her initial research treatises on curse magic, historical accounts of similar afflictions, theoretical frameworks for magical interaction. The more she read, the more complex their situation appeared. Breaking a curse of this magnitude would require not just understanding its mechanics, but also addressing its fundamental purpose. Curses weren't random manifestations of misfortune. They arose from specific violations of natural or moral law, persisting until those violations were somehow resolved. If Prince Kieran's curse stemmed from the death of someone he loved, then breaking it might require him to face that trauma directly. The prospect of guiding someone through such a process while managing her own magical volatility seemed almost impossibly daunting. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of ice and fire, of reaching hands that turned to frost at her touch. When she woke, pale dawn light was filtering through her windows, and another knock at her door announced the beginning of her first full day in the Glacier Crown. Vera brought breakfast along with a message from Prince Kieran requesting Isolde's presence in the palace's great library at her earliest convenience. After a quick meal, Isolde dressed in the provided clothing and set out to explore more of her new environment. The library proved to be even more impressive than the prince's private study, its collection spanning multiple floors connected by spiraling staircases of crystallized ice. Thousands of volumes lined the walls, their spines bearing titles in languages she recognized and many she didn't. Reading alcoves were scattered throughout the space, each with its own fireplace and comfortable seating. The overall effect was both scholarly and, quote, magical, a temple dedicated to the preservation of knowledge. She found Prince Kieran in a section devoted to historical records, several thick tomes open before him on a reading table. He looked up as she approached, and she noticed that frost had formed on the pages wherever his fingers had touched them. "Good morning," he said, his breath visible in small puffs despite the library's warmth. "I trust you slept well?" "Well enough," Isolde replied, settling into the chair across from him. "Vera told me about the villages that have been abandoned. You didn't mention that your curse is spreading." Prince Kieran's expression darkened. "I was trying not to overwhelm you on your first day." "Yes, the eternal winter expands by roughly a league each year. At this rate, it will reach the Southern Kingdoms within a decade. And you believe our curses are connected somehow? That breaking yours might also break mine? I believe they're opposite sides of the same coin." Prince Kieran said, turning one of the books toward her. The page showed a detailed illustration of two figures surrounded by swirling patterns of energy. "Look at this passage from the Chronicle of Balanced Magics." Isolde read aloud from the ancient text. "When two souls bear curses of opposing nature, their union may result in either mutual destruction or mutual salvation. The catalyst lies not in their individual power, but in their willingness to surrender that power for the sake of the other." "Surrender our power?" Isolde looked up at him in alarm. "You mean give up our magic entirely?" "Perhaps," Prince Kieran admitted. "Or perhaps it means learning to channel our abilities through something greater than our individual desires. I'm not certain yet." They spent the morning examining various texts, comparing accounts of similar magical afflictions and their resolutions. A pattern began to emerge. Most successful curse breakings involved some form of willing sacrifice, a conscious choice to place another's welfare above one's own survival. The concept was both beautiful and terrifying in its implications. "There's something else we need to discuss," Prince Kieran said as they took a break for lunch. "If we're going to work together closely, you need to understand the physical dangers involved." "What kind of dangers?" He gestured to the frost patterns that had formed around his workspace. "My curse doesn't just make me emotionally cold, Isolde. My body temperature is constantly dropping, and that effect intensifies around strong magic. When I'm near you, when your power is active, the temperature drops even more dramatically." "How dramatically?" "Enough to cause frostbite within minutes of direct contact. Enough to freeze the blood in your veins if we're not careful." Prince Kieran's expression was grave. "I never tried to work this closely with another magic wielder. We could be putting both of our lives at risk." Isolde considered this information, weighing it against what she had learned about her own curse. "My magic tends to surge when I'm emotionally affected. Strong feelings make it harder to control. Then we'll need to maintain careful emotional distance while still working together intimately enough to understand each other's afflictions." Prince Kieran laughed bitterly. "Do you see the impossible contradiction we're facing?" "Maybe that's the point," Isolde said slowly. "Maybe the curse can only be broken by people who are willing to risk everything for each other despite barely knowing each other. Strangers learning to trust completely." Prince Kieran nodded thoughtfully. "It has a certain poetic justice to it." They returned to their research with renewed focus, but Isolde found herself studying the prince as much as the books before her. She was beginning to notice subtle things about him, the way he held his shoulders as if carrying an invisible weight, the careful precision of his movements that spoke of constant self-control, the moments when his mask of composure slipped to reveal glimpses of profound loneliness. "Tell me about the person you loved," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Prince Kieran's hands stilled on the page he was turning. "Why?" "Because understanding how your curse began might help us figure out how to end it." For a long moment he didn't respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet she had to lean forward to hear him. "Her name was Lyanna. She was my closest friend, the daughter of my father's advisor. We grew up together, and when our magic began to manifest..." He paused, pain flickering across his features. "We practiced together. We thought we could help each other learn control. What happened?" I lost control during a particularly intense training session. The temperature around me dropped so rapidly that she didn't have time to get away. By the time I realized what was happening, she was already freezing. I tried to warm her, but my magic only made it worse. She died in my arms, and her last words were an apology for not being strong enough to help me. The raw grief in his voice made Isolde's chest tighten with sympathy. It wasn't your fault, wasn't it? Prince Kieran's laugh was bitter. I knew I was dangerous. I knew my magic was unstable, but I was selfish enough to want her company, to believe that my loneliness justified the risk to her safety. You were 16 and learning to control abilities that no one understood. You made a mistake, not a choice to harm her. The result was the same. Isolde reached across the table without thinking, her hand stopping just short of touching his. Even at this distance, she could feel the cold radiating from his skin like an invisible barrier. The result was the same, but the intention was different. Guilt for an accident isn't the same as guilt for a crime. Prince Kieran stared at her almost extended hand, his expression unreadable. You're very kind to say so. I'm not being kind. I'm being honest. Isolde withdrew her hand slowly. If you've been carrying this guilt for 8 years, letting it define your entire existence, then maybe that's what's feeding the curse. You think my guilt is maintaining the magic? I think strong emotions can shape magical manifestations in ways we don't fully understand. Your grief and self-blame might be preventing the curse from running its natural course. Prince Kieran was quiet for a long time, processing her words. Finally, he nodded slowly. It's possible. But if that's true, then simply letting go of the guilt won't be enough. The damage has already been done, the pattern established. Breaking it would require... Would require what? Would require me to forgive myself, and I'm not certain that's possible. The conversation left them both subdued, and by unspoken agreement, they focused on research for the remainder of the day. But Isolde found herself thinking about forgiveness and self-acceptance, about the ways trauma could become a prison more confining than any physical cell. That evening, as she prepared for bed, Isolde reflected on her first full day in the Glacier Crown. Despite the obvious dangers and uncertainties ahead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose. For the first time since her magic had manifested, she wasn't running from her abilities or hiding what she was. She was using her knowledge and power to help someone else, and that felt like a form of redemption she hadn't known she needed. The following days established a routine that was both comfortable and charged with underlying tension. Each morning, she and Prince Kieran would meet in the library to continue their research. They explored theories of curse mechanics, studied historical precedents, and gradually began to map the specific parameters of their individual afflictions. The work was intellectually stimulating but emotionally draining, as it required them to examine their deepest wounds with clinical detachment. Isolde learned that Prince Kieran's curse operated on multiple levels. The physical manifestation, his abnormally low body temperature and the expanding winter, was merely the most visible symptom. On a deeper level, the curse had severed his capacity for emotional warmth, making it nearly impossible for him to form genuine connections with others. He could feel affection and concern, but only as distant intellectual concepts rather than visceral experiences. It's like looking at a painting of fire instead of feeling its heat, he explained during one of their sessions. I can appreciate beauty, understand love, recognize joy in others, but I can't truly experience these things myself. Everything is filtered through a layer of ice that never melts. In return, Isolde shared the details of her own curse with unprecedented honesty. Her magic was indeed growing stronger over time, but that growth came at the cost of increasing isolation. The more powerful she became, the more dangerous her presence was to ordinary people. Her emotions, when heightened, could trigger magical surges that affected her environment in unpredictable ways. It's not just transmutation anymore, she admitted, gesturing to a section of bookshelves that had reorganized themselves during a moment of intense concentration. My magic seems to be evolving, becoming more responsive to my subconscious desires. Sometimes I change things without even realizing it. What kinds of things? Isolde hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. People's perceptions, sometimes. Their memories of conversations we've had, their feelings toward me. It happens when I desperately want them to understand or accept me. I don't do it intentionally, but afterward, they act differently. And I can never be sure if their affection is real or if I've unconsciously influenced them. Prince Kieran studied her with new understanding. That's why you've always been alone. You can't trust your own relationships. Exactly. And the more isolated I become, the stronger the compulsion grows to use my magic to connect with people. It's a cycle that gets worse over time. As they delved deeper into their research, they began to uncover references to a phenomenon called sympathetic curse resonance, the idea that complementary magical afflictions could either amplify each other catastrophically or cancel each other out entirely. The key seemed to lie in the emotional relationship between the cursed individuals. "Look at this passage," Prince Kieran said one afternoon, pointing to a text written in an archaic dialect. "It speaks of hearts that beat in opposition finding harmony through willing surrender. I think it's describing the process we need to undergo." Isolde leaned closer to read the ancient words, acutely aware of the cold emanating from his body. Over the past week, she had noticed that the temperature around him dropped more dramatically when she was near, as if their magical auras were indeed interacting in some fundamental way. Willing surrender of what, exactly? Of the need to control our individual destinies, of the fear that drives our respective isolations. Prince Kieran looked up at her, and she was struck by the intensity in his storm-gray eyes. "I think we have to be willing to risk everything for each other, including our own lives, before the curse will release its hold." The concept was both thrilling and terrifying. Isolde had spent her entire adult life prioritizing her own survival above all else, moving constantly to stay ahead of discovery and death. The idea of placing someone else's welfare above her own went against every instinct she had developed. "How do we even begin something like that?" she asked. "We barely know each other." "Maybe that's precisely why it might work," Prince Kieran suggested. "Our connection isn't complicated by years of shared history or conflicting loyalties. We can choose to trust each other based purely on our mutual understanding of what it means to be cursed." And over the following days, they began to test small interactions designed to build trust and understanding. Prince Kieran shared stories of his childhood before the curse manifested, painting a picture of a boy who had been kind and curious and full of hope for the future. Isolde reciprocated with memories of her grandmother, who had been the only person to truly accept her magical nature before fear overtook love. She used to say that magic was just another way of loving the world, Isolde said one evening as they sat by one of the library fireplaces, careful to maintain enough distance to prevent dangerous temperature fluctuations. But the desire to change things came from caring too much about how they were. "Your grandmother sounds wise," Prince Kieran replied. "What happened to her?" "She died when I was 17. Natural causes, but after she was gone, I had no one left who understood what I was. That's when I started running." "I'm sorry. Losing the person who truly sees you is... He paused, pain flickering across his features. "It's like losing your anchor to humanity itself." Their conversations grew more intimate as the days passed, though they were always careful to maintain physical distance. Isolde found herself looking forward to their morning meetings with an anticipation that went beyond mere professional collaboration. Prince Kieran was intelligent and surprisingly gentle despite his fearsome reputation, and his dedication to saving his people was admirable even if his methods were questionable. But it was the moments when his carefully maintained composure cracked that affected her most deeply. Sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she would catch glimpses of the lonely young man beneath the Ice Prince facade. The weight of responsibility he carried was crushing, and the isolation imposed by his curse had warped his understanding of normal human interaction. "You don't have to be perfect all the time," she told him one afternoon when he apologized for the third time for a minor research error. "I'm not going to run away because you made a mistake." Prince Kieran looked at her with something like wonder. "Everyone runs away eventually. I'm still here. You've only been here for 2 weeks. And in those 2 weeks, you've shown me more consideration than most people manage in a lifetime. You could have simply commanded my obedience, but instead you've treated me as an equal partner in this endeavor. That means something. Something shifted in Prince Kieran's expression, a subtle warming that was gone almost before she noticed it. But the temperature around them didn't drop as dramatically as usual, and Isolde wondered if their growing emotional connection was beginning to affect their magical interaction. That night, she had a dream unlike any she had experienced before. She was standing in a vast ballroom made entirely of ice, its walls reflecting her image into infinity. At the center of the room stood Prince Kieran, but he was different somehow, younger, more vibrant, with color in his cheeks and warmth in his eyes. He extended his hand to her, and in the dream logic that made such things possible, she knew that touching him wouldn't bring frost but spring. She woke with tears on her cheeks and a longing in her chest that had nothing to do with magic, and everything to do with the gradual realization that she was falling in love with a man who might be incapable of loving her back. The thought terrified her. Emotional attachment was dangerous for someone with her particular curse. Strong feelings triggered magical surges that could affect the object of her affections in unpredictable ways. But as she lay in the pre-dawn darkness, listening to wind howl through the palace corridors, she admitted to herself that it might already be too late for caution. Her behavior over the following days became increasingly erratic as she struggled to suppress her growing feelings. She found excuses to cut their research sessions short, maintained greater physical distance than strictly necessary, and avoided the kind of intimate conversation that had been building their partnership. Prince Kieran noticed the change but seemed unsure how to address it. "Have I done something to offend you?" he asked finally, after she had spent an entire morning responding to his questions with monosyllables. "No," Isolde said quickly, then realized how unconvincing she sounded. I need some time to process everything we've been learning." "Of course," Prince Kieran replied, though his expression suggested he didn't entirely believe her explanation. "Perhaps you'd like to explore more of the palace? There are sections you haven't seen yet, including the conservatory where we attempt to grow things despite the eternal winter." The suggestion seemed safe enough a chance to occupy her mind with something other than her complicated feelings. Isolde agreed, and Prince Kieran arranged for Vera to serve as her guide while he attended to administrative duties that had been accumulating during their intensive research period. The conservatory proved to be a marvel of magical engineering. A vast greenhouse built into the palace's southern face where enchanted walls maintained a delicate climate warm enough to support plant life. Despite the hostile environment outside, the space was filled with flowering vines, fruit trees, and herb gardens that provided fresh food for the palace's inhabitants. The prince spends hours here when the weight of his responsibilities becomes too much, Vera confided as they walked among the carefully tended beds. He can't touch the plants directly, of course, but he designed most of the warming enchantments that keep them alive. Isolde examined the intricate magical frameworks that maintained the conservatory's artificial spring, impressed by their sophistication and subtlety. This must take enormous energy to sustain. "It does," Vera agreed. "Sometimes, after particularly difficult days, the prince comes here and pours his power into maintaining the enchantments. He says it's the only way he can create something beautiful instead of destroying it." The comment provided new insight into Prince Kieran's character, revealing a creative and nurturing aspect that his cursed nature usually suppressed. Isolde found herself thinking about the contradiction between his public image and private reality, how different he might have been, if not for the tragic accident that had defined his existence. "Vera," she said impulsively, "what do the other servants think of him?" "Really think, not what they say publicly." The young woman glanced around to ensure they were alone, then spoke quietly. "Most of us came here as refugees, my lady. We had nowhere else to go when the expanding winter claimed our homes. Prince Kieran could have simply let us freeze, but instead he gave us shelter, meaningful work, and protection. Yes, his presence brings cold, but it also brings safety. We're grateful to him, even if we can't get too close. Do you think he's happy?" Vera's expression grew sad. "I think he's the loneliest person I've ever seen. All that power, all that responsibility, and no one he can truly share it with. It's no wonder the curse grows stronger instead of weaker. Loneliness feeds on itself, until it becomes the only thing a person knows. That evening, Isolde sought out Prince Kieran in his private study. Determined to address the distance she had been maintaining, she found him standing before the great window that overlooked his domain, his posture radiating exhaustion and defeat. "The reports from the border villages came in today," he said without turning around. 3 more settlements are requesting evacuation assistance. The winter is advancing faster than our models predicted. "I'm sorry," Isolde said, moving to stand beside him at a careful distance. "That must be devastating to hear." "Devastating," Prince Kieran repeated softly. "Yes, I suppose it should be. But I feel it more as an abstract concern than a visceral pain. Even my grief for my people is filtered through this cursed detachment." Looking out at the frozen landscape, Isolde could see the lights of distant settlements flickering like dying stars against the perpetual twilight. Each point of light represented families struggling to survive in an increasingly hostile environment, their lives hanging in the balance while she and the prince conducted theoretical research in comfort. "We need to try something more direct," she said suddenly. "The research is valuable, but we're running out of time for a purely academic approach." Prince Kieran turned to look at her, his storm-gray eyes reflecting the aurora that danced across the sky beyond the window. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we test the sympathetic resonance theory directly. If our curses can interact to cancel each other out, we need to find out what conditions make that possible." "That could be extremely dangerous," Prince Kieran warned. "If the resonance amplifies our afflictions instead of neutralizing them, we could kill each other or cause catastrophic magical feedback that affects the entire kingdom. And if we don't try, your people will continue to suffer while we debate theoretical possibilities." Isolde turned to face him fully, drawing on reserves of courage she hadn't known she possessed. "I'm willing to take the risk. The question is whether you trust me enough to try." Prince Kieran studied her face in the ethereal light, and she could see him weighing the potential consequences of her proposal. "What exactly do you have in mind?" "Physical contact," Isolde said simply. "Brief, controlled contact while both of our magical auras are active. If the theory is correct, my warmth-based magic should counteract your cold-based curse at the point of intersection. And if the theory is wrong, then we'll discover that the hard way. But at least we'll know, and we can pursue other options." Prince Kieran was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the window and the suffering settlements beyond. When he spoke again, his voice carried a resolution that hadn't been there before. "Very well. But we do this carefully, with safeguards in place. I won't have your death on my conscience along with all the others." They spent the next hour planning their experiment with meticulous care. They would attempt contact in the conservatory, where the ambient temperature was warmest, and magical containment fields could be established to prevent broader effects. Vera would be stationed nearby with emergency protocols in case something went wrong. The initial contact would last no more than a few seconds, just long enough to determine whether the resonance was constructive or destructive. "Are you certain about this?" Prince Kieran asked as they prepared to leave his study. "Once we begin testing direct magical interaction, there's no going back to purely theoretical research." "I'm certain," Isolde replied, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "We can't solve this problem from a safe distance. Sometimes you have to be willing to risk everything to gain anything." The next morning dawned clear and cold, with aurora light painting the sky in shades of green and gold. Isolde dressed carefully in the warmest clothing she could find, knowing that the experiment would expose her to temperatures potentially far below anything she had experienced. Her hands shook slightly as she braided her hair back, but she attributed the tremor to anticipation rather than fear. She met Prince Kieran in the conservatory as planned, finding him standing among the fruit trees with his hands clasped behind his back. He had also dressed warmly, though she suspected the precaution was more for her benefit than his own. The ambient temperature around him seemed lower than usual, suggesting that his anxiety was affecting his magical control. "The containment fields are in place," he reported, gesturing to barely visible lines of energy that formed a protective barrier around a small clearing among the plants. "Vera is stationed at the emergency station, and I've instructed the other servants to stay clear of this wing." Isolde nodded, stepping into the contained area and feeling the subtle pressure of the magical boundaries. "How do you want to approach this?" "Slowly and carefully," Prince Kieran replied, joining her within the containment field. "We'll activate our magical auras simultaneously, then attempt brief skin contact. Just fingertips initially. If the resonance appears stable, we can try for longer or more extensive contact." They positioned themselves facing each other at arm's length, close enough to touch but not yet making contact. Isolde closed her eyes and reached for her magic, feeling the familiar warmth spread through her body as silver light began to dance around her fingers. She opened her eyes to see Prince Kieran surrounded by an aura of crystalline blue-white energy that made the air around him shimmer with ice particles. "Ready?" he asked, extending one hand toward her. "Ready," Isolde confirmed, raising her own hand to mirror his position. Their fingertips touched, and the world exploded into sensation. The first thing Isolde felt was cold so intense it burned, followed immediately by a warmth so powerful it seemed to originate from her very soul. The competing sensations should have been agony, but instead they created a strange harmony that resonated through her entire being. She could feel Prince Kieran's magic interacting with hers, ice and fire finding a balance point that neither had achieved alone. But more than the physical sensations, she experienced an emotional connection unlike anything she had ever known. For a brief, impossible moment, she could feel what Prince Kieran felt: the crushing weight of responsibility, the gnawing loneliness, the desperate hope that somehow his curse could be broken before it destroyed everything he cared about. And beneath all of that, she sensed something that made her breath catch, the tentative beginning of feelings that matched her own. The contact lasted only seconds before they both pulled away, gasping with the intensity of the experience. Isolde staggered backward, her entire body tingling with residual magic, while Prince Kieran steadied himself against one of the fruit trees. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern overriding his own obvious disorientation. Yes, I think so," Isolde managed, examining her fingertips for signs of frostbite. Instead, she found them warm and unmarked, as if the contact had somehow protected her from the worst effects of his curse. "What about you?" Prince Kieran looked down at his own hand with something like wonder. "I can feel warmth," he said softly. "Actual warmth, not just the intellectual understanding of the concept. It's fading now, but for a moment." He trailed off, his expression filled with a longing so profound it made her chest ache. "Did you sense the emotional connection?" Isolde asked carefully. "The way our feelings seem to overlap?" "Yes," Prince Kieran admitted, his gaze meeting hers with new intensity. "I felt your magic, but I also felt your care for me, your willingness to risk yourself for my sake." Heat flooded Isolde's cheeks, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. "And I felt yours. The way you've been trying to protect me even while asking for my help." They stood in silence for a moment, processing the implications of what they had experienced. The magical resonance had clearly been successful, neither of them had been harmed, and both had gained temporary relief from their respective afflictions. But the emotional component had revealed feelings that neither had been entirely ready to acknowledge. "We should document our observations," Prince Kieran said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "And plan the next phase of testing." "Of course," Isolde agreed, though part of her wanted to ignore practicality and explore the connection they had just discovered. "Though I think we should wait at least a day before attempting another contact. That was intense." Over the following days, they conducted several more controlled experiments, gradually increasing the duration and extent of their physical contact. Each interaction confirmed their initial findings: their magical auras balanced each other in a way that provided temporary relief from their curses. But the emotional component grew stronger with each attempt, until they could no longer pretend it was merely a side effect of magical resonance. "I need to tell you something," Prince Kieran said during their 5th experimental session, as they sat facing each other in the conservatory with their hands almost touching. "The feelings you've been sensing aren't just magical echoes. They're real." Isolde's heart skipped a beat, but she tried to keep her voice steady. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that despite every rational argument against it, despite the obvious impossibility of the situation, I'm falling in love with you." Prince Kieran's confession was delivered with characteristic directness, but she could see the vulnerability beneath his composed exterior. "I know it's complicated by our curses, by the danger we pose to each other, by the fact that my kingdom is dying while we conduct these experiments. But I can't pretend the feelings don't exist. They're not just magical echoes for me either," Isolde admitted quietly. "I've been trying to suppress them because I was afraid they would complicate our work, but they might be the key to breaking our curses entirely," Prince Kieran finished. "The willing surrender the texts speak of, perhaps it means surrendering our fears about love, about connection, about the vulnerability that comes with truly caring for another person." The possibility was both exhilarating and terrifying. If their growing love could indeed break the curses, it would solve both of their problems while saving the kingdom from the expanding winter. But if they were wrong, if the emotional intensity amplified their magical afflictions instead of balancing them, the consequences could be catastrophic. "There's only one way to find out," Isolde said, extending her hand toward him. "But this time, we're not just testing magical resonance. We're testing whether love can triumph over magic." Prince Kieran looked at her outstretched hand, then up at her face. "Are you certain? If this goes wrong, if I hurt you or kill you, then at least we'll face it together instead of alone," Isolde interrupted, echoing the words he had spoken during their first conversation. "I'd rather die trying to break free than live forever in isolation." Prince Kieran reached out slowly, his fingers hovering just above hers. "I love you," he said simply. "Whatever happens next, I want you to know that." "I love you too," Isolde replied, closing the distance between their hands. This time, when their skin made contact, the sensation was entirely different. Instead of the jarring contrast between ice and fire, there was a gentle warmth that seemed to spread from the point of contact throughout both of their bodies. Isolde felt Prince Kieran's magic intertwining with hers, not in opposition but in harmony, creating something greater than either could achieve alone. The emotional connection was even more profound than before, but now it carried overtones of joy and hope rather than just understanding and sympathy. She could feel Prince Kieran's wonder at experiencing true warmth for the first time in 8 years, could sense his amazement that someone could love him despite the monster he believed himself to be. "Look," Prince Kieran whispered, and Isolde opened her eyes to see that the frost patterns on the nearby windows were melting away. The temperature in the conservatory was rising noticeably, not with the artificial warmth of magical enchantments, but with something that felt natural and sustainable. They maintained contact for several minutes, watching in amazement as the effects spread beyond the conservatory walls. Through the windows, they could see snow beginning to melt in the palace courtyard, revealing patches of dark earth that hadn't been visible in years. The aurora lights in the sky were changing too, shifting from the cold blues and greens of winter to warmer golds and roses that spoke of approaching spring. "Is it working?" Isolde asked softly, afraid to break the spell with too much enthusiasm. "I think so," Prince Kieran replied, his voice filled with a wonder she had never heard before. "I can feel the curse weakening, like ice cracking under spring sun. But more than that, I can feel everything else coming back. Emotions I thought were lost forever. The capacity for joy and hope and connection." As if to prove his point, he lifted their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was tender and natural, completely free of the careful restraint that had characterized all his previous interactions. Isolde felt tears spring to her eyes at the simple beauty of it. "What about your curse?" Prince Kieran asked. "Do you feel any change?" Isolde considered the question, taking inventory of her internal state. Her magic was still present, still powerful, but it no longer felt like a wild force threatening to escape her control. Instead, it felt integrated, balanced, as if it had finally found its proper place in her life. "It's different," she said slowly. "Not gone, but tamed somehow. Like it's finally serving my will instead of ruling it." They remained in contact as the sun set beyond the palace walls, watching the transformation spread across Prince Kieran's domain. The eternal winter was retreating, not with the violent suddenness of magical catastrophe, but with the gentle persistence of natural seasonal change. Snow melted to reveal dormant gardens, frozen streams began to flow again, and the aurora lights faded to be replaced by stars that had been hidden for years. The villages, Prince Kieran said suddenly, realization dawning on his face. They'll need to know that it's safe to return, but they can rebuild in areas that have been abandoned. Tomorrow, Isolde said firmly, tightening her grip on his hand. Tonight, we celebrate the fact that we're both finally free. Prince Kieran smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise after an endless night. Free, he repeated wonderingly. I had almost forgotten what that word meant. They spent the evening in the conservatory, talking and laughing and simply enjoying the novelty of being able to touch without fear. The transformation was ongoing, skirting outward from the palace in concentric circles of warming air and melting snow. By morning, Isolde knew, the entire kingdom would be experiencing its first spring in nearly a decade. I have a confession, Prince Kieran said as they sat together watching the stars emerge in the clearing sky. I brought you here not just because I hoped you could help break my curse, but because I was desperately lonely. I told myself it was about saving the kingdom, but part of it was purely selfish. I'm glad you were selfish, Isolde replied, leaning against his shoulder and marveling at the warmth she felt there. If you hadn't been, we might never have found each other, and I might never have learned that love isn't a weakness to be feared but a strength to be cherished, Prince Kieran added, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. You've given me back not just my humanity but my hope for the future. You've given me a home, Isolde said softly. The first real home I've ever had, a place where my magic is valued instead of feared, where I'm wanted for who I am instead of despite what I am. As dawn broke over the transformed kingdom, they made their way to the highest tower of the palace to survey the changes their love had wrought. The landscape that spread below them was unrecognizable green fields where there had been ice, flowing rivers where there had been frozen wastes, and in the distance, the smoke of cookfires from villages that were already beginning to stir with new life. It's beautiful, Isolde breathed, taking in the scope of the transformation. It's a new beginning, Prince Kieran agreed, wrapping his arms around her from behind. For the kingdom, for my people, and for us. They stood together in the morning light, two souls who had found redemption in each other's arms, watching their love literally reshape the world around them. The curses that had defined their lives were broken, not through sacrifice or surrender, but through the simple act of choosing to trust, to hope, and to love despite every reason to remain afraid. In the months that followed, they worked together to help the kingdom adjust to its transformation. Villages were rebuilt, agricultural systems were reestablished, and the people slowly adapted to the return of normal seasons. Prince Kieran proved to be a wise and compassionate ruler when freed from the constraints of his curse, while Isolde found fulfillment in using her abilities to heal the magical damage that had accumulated over years of eternal winter. Their wedding was held on the first anniversary of the curse's breaking, in a ceremony that took place in the same conservatory where they had first tested their magical connection. The entire kingdom celebrated, grateful not just for the return of spring, but for the love story that had made it possible. Do you ever regret it? Isolde asked Prince Kieran one evening as they walked through gardens that were now abundant with summer flowers. Giving up the power of eternal winter? Prince Kieran considered the question, looking out over fields where his people worked and played under warm sunlight. Never, he said firmly. Power that destroys isn't true power at all. This being able to create instead of destroy, to nurture instead of freeze, this is what real strength looks like. And our magic? Isolde asked, referring to the abilities they both still possessed, but which now felt balanced and controlled. Do you think we'll ever understand fully how the breaking worked? Perhaps, Prince Kieran replied, taking her hand in his as they walked. But I think some mysteries are meant to be experienced rather than explained. What matters is that we found each other, that we were brave enough to risk everything for love, and that our story can give hope to others who feel trapped by circumstances beyond their control. Years passed, and their kingdom flourished under their joint rule. They had children who inherited both of their magical gifts, but without the accompanying curses, proving that love could indeed transmute even the most fundamental aspects of magical inheritance. The palace became a refuge for other magic wielders who sought acceptance and understanding, transforming from a fortress of isolation into a beacon of hope. Isolde often thought about the scarred soldier who had brought her north, wondering if he had known somehow that he was delivering her not to imprisonment but to salvation. She hoped that wherever he was, he could see what had grown from the seeds of that difficult journey. On quiet evenings, she and Prince Kieran would sometimes return to the conservatory where their love had first broken their curses, marveling at how much their lives had changed from that moment of desperate courage. The space was now filled with clans from all over the world, a living testament to the abundance that was possible when fear was replaced with trust. "Do you remember what you said that first day?" Isolde asked during one such visit. "About sometimes the most we can hope for is not facing our fates alone?" Prince Kieran smiled, the expression warm and genuine in a way that would have been impossible during his cursed years. "I do, but I think I was wrong about that being the most we could hope for. What do you think is possible now?" "Everything," Prince Kieran replied, pulling her into his arms for a kiss that still carried echoes of the magic that had saved them both. "When you have love, everything is possible." Their story became legend throughout the Seven Kingdoms, a tale told to children and adults alike about the power of love to overcome even the most terrible circumstances. But for Isolde and Prince Kieran, it was not a story at all. It was simply their life, built on the foundation of two lonely souls who had been brave enough to reach for each other across an impossible divide. The Ice Prince and his prisoner had become partners, lovers, rulers, and parents. They had learned that true freedom came not from the absence of challenge, but from facing those challenges together. And in the end, they had discovered that the greatest magic of all was not the power to change the world, but the courage to let the world change you. In the final accounting, their curses had been not punishments but preparations, forging them into people capable of recognizing and cherishing the love that would ultimately save them both. The ice had melted, the prisoner had been freed, and two hearts that had beaten in lonely isolation had learned to beat as one. The eternal winter was over. Spring had come at last. But even as peace settled over their transformed kingdom, new challenges began to emerge from beyond their borders. Word of the curse's breaking had spread throughout the Seven Kingdoms, carried by merchants and travelers who had witnessed the miraculous transformation. With that news came both wonder and concern from neighboring rulers who had grown accustomed to the buffer of the eternal winter between their territories and potential threats. 3 years after their wedding, Isolde stood on the palace's eastern balcony, watching a convoy of carriages wind their way up the mountain pass. The delegation bore the banners of 4 different kingdoms, their colorful standards a stark contrast against the new green landscape. Prince Kieran joined her, his expression thoughtful as he observed their approaching guests. "The Council of Temporal Sovereignty," he said, referencing the alliance that had formed among the southern kingdoms during the worst years of the eternal winter. "I suspect they're here to ensure our transformation wasn't the prelude to magical expansion." Isolde nodded, understanding the political implications. "They're afraid we'll use our combined abilities to conquer rather than heal. Can you blame them? A kingdom that can reshape geography through love is either the greatest ally or the most dangerous enemy imaginable." The delegation's arrival brought with it a tension that had been absent from their lives since the curse's breaking. Lord Commander Aldrich of Westmarche led the group, his weathered face bearing the skepticism of a career military man who had seen too many magical promises turn into threats. Accompanying him were Princess Ilara of Sunhaven, whose kingdom bordered their own to the south, Master Corwin of the Magical Regulation Council, and Lady Thessarian of the Eastern Reaches. The formal reception took place in the palace's great hall, which had been restored to accommodate diplomatic functions. Unlike the intimidating ice cathedral it had once been, the space now featured warm woods, flowing tapestries, and windows that allowed natural light to illuminate the proceedings. Isolde and Prince Kieran received their guests with the courtesy due to their stations, but the underlying wariness was palpable on both sides. "Your Highnesses," Lord Commander Aldred began, his tone respectful but firm. We come seeking assurance that the magical transformation of your kingdom represents no threat to the stability of our region. The transformation was defensive in nature, Prince Kieran replied diplomatically. We sought only to break curses that were causing suffering to our people. We have no territorial ambitions beyond our traditional borders. Master Corwin leaned forward, his scholar's robes rustling softly. Yet the magical energies involved in such a transformation are unprecedented in recorded history. The Council requires understanding of how such power might be controlled or contained should it prove unstable. Isolde felt a familiar spike of defensive anger but controlled it carefully. Our abilities are not weapons to be regulated by external authorities. We've used them only to heal what was broken. Forgive the implication, Princess Ilara interjected smoothly. But history teaches us that good intentions don't always prevent unintended consequences. The magical resonance that broke your curses, could it be replicated? Could it be weaponized by others? The question struck at the heart of their visitors' concerns. If the technique they had discovered could be taught or duplicated, it would fundamentally alter the balance of power throughout the known world. Magic wielders who had lived in hiding might emerge to seek similar transformations, potentially destabilizing kingdoms that had built their security on the suppression of magical abilities. The process was unique to our specific circumstances, Prince Kieran explained carefully. Our curses were complementary in a way that made resonance possible. It's not a technique that could be applied generally. Yet surely you've documented the process, Lady Thessarian pressed. Academic knowledge has a way of becoming practical application given sufficient time and motivation. Isolde exchanged a glance with her husband, recognizing the impossible position they were being placed in. Complete transparency would provide their visitors with the reassurance they sought, but might also enable others to attempt dangerous magical experiments. Secrecy would fuel suspicion and potentially lead to hostilities they desperately wanted to avoid. We propose a compromise, Isolde said finally. A joint research initiative staffed by scholars from all our kingdoms. Together we can study the phenomenon while ensuring that any knowledge gained is shared responsibly among trusted allies. The suggestion sparked immediate debate among the delegates. Master Corwin was intrigued by the scholarly possibilities, while Lord Commander Aldrich worried about security implications. Princess Ilara saw potential diplomatic advantages, but Lady Thessarian remained skeptical about trusting former enemies with such sensitive information. What safeguards would prevent this collaboration from becoming a cover for magical weapons development? She demanded. Prince Kieran's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained level. The same safeguards that have prevented us from using our abilities for conquest despite having ample opportunity. Our word, our demonstrated commitment to peace, and the mutual benefits of Crow. Cooperation over conflict. The negotiations continued for 3 days, with each session revealing new layers of complexity to their situation. But delegates wanted detailed explanations of magical theory, demonstrations of control, and binding agreements about future conduct. Isolde and Prince Kieran found themselves walking a delicate line between cooperation and submission, trying to address legitimate concerns without surrendering their sovereignty. On the 4th morning, an unexpected development changed the entire dynamic of the discussions. A messenger arrived bearing urgent news from the Northern Territories areas that had been considered uninhabitable wasteland beyond the former borders of the Eternal Winter. Exploration teams had discovered evidence of an ancient civilization, including magical artifacts and inscriptions that suggested their recent transformation had awakened something long dormant. The ruins appear to be pre-kingdom, the messenger reported breathlessly. Structures that predate the establishment of the 7 kingdoms by centuries, possibly millennia, and they're showing signs of recent magical activity. Master Corwin's scholarly excitement was immediately evident. This could rewrite everything we know about the history of magic in our region. The implications for understanding how large-scale magical transformations occur. The implications for potential threats should be our primary concern, Lord Commander Aldrich interrupted sharply. Ancient magical sites don't become active without reason. If breaking your curse triggered some kind of awakening, we need to understand what we're dealing with. Princess Ilara turned to Isolde and Prince Kieran with new urgency. This changes the nature of our discussions entirely. If your transformation has had consequences beyond your kingdom's borders, then regional cooperation isn't just advisable, it's essential. The revelation transformed the delegation from skeptical overseers to concerned partners almost overnight. Plans were rapidly developed for a joint expedition to investigate the northern ruins, with teams of scholars, mages, and security personnel drawn from all 5 kingdoms. Isolde and Prince Kieran would lead the effort, their unique magical abilities potentially crucial for understanding whatever they might discover. Preparations for the expedition took 2 weeks, during which the palace became a hub of activity unlike anything it had seen since its transformation. Maps were consulted, supplies gathered, and magical protections prepared for what might prove to be a dangerous journey into unknown territory. The delegation members who had arrived as potential adversaries found themselves working closely with their hosts, shared purpose overriding political suspicions. "I've been thinking about what we might find," Isolde confided to Prince Kieran the night before their departure. "What if the curse that affected you wasn't unique? What if it was part of something larger, and breaking it has disrupted a magical system we don't understand?" Prince Kieran considered her words carefully. "You think there might be other affected areas? Other people struggling with similar afflictions? Or worse, what if the eternal winter was actually containing something that's now free to emerge?" Isolde shivered despite the warm evening air. "We assumed breaking the curse was an unqualified good, but what if it was serving a purpose we didn't recognize? Then we'll face whatever consequences arise from our choices," Prince Kieran replied firmly. "We couldn't have lived with the alternative, watching our people slowly freeze to death while we preserved some unknown magical balance." The expedition departed at dawn, a caravan of nearly 50 people traveling north through terrain that few had ever seen. The landscape beyond the former borders of the eternal winter was strange and beautiful, with geological formations that seemed to defy natural explanation. Crystal outcroppings jutted from rolling hills, their surfaces reflecting light in patterns that hurt the eyes if observed too directly. Ancient forests stretched between valleys, their trees bearing leaves of silver and gold that chimed softly in the wind. "This doesn't look like normal geography," Master Corwin observed on their second day of travel. "The magical saturation in the environment is extraordinary, as if the very earth has been shaped by centuries of exposure to powerful forces." Isolde could feel the truth of his observation in her bones. Her magical senses, already heightened by her transformation, were picking up resonances from every direction. The landscape itself seemed alive with potential, waiting for the right catalyst to activate dormant energies. On the 3rd day, they crested a ridge and saw their destination spread before them. The ruins covered several square miles, their architecture unlike anything from recorded history. Spires of black stone twisted skyward in spirals that seemed to continue beyond visual perception, while bridges of crystallized light connected structure to structure without visible support. At the center of the complex stood a massive dome that pulsed with soft aurora light, its rhythm matching the beat of a giant heart. "By all the gods," Princess Ilara breathed. "It's magnificent. It's active," Lady Thessarian added with obvious concern. "Whatever those ruins once were, they're not dormant anymore." Lord Commander Aldrich was already organizing security perimeters and establishing base camp at a safe distance from the structures. His military experience was proving invaluable as they prepared to explore what might prove to be the most significant archaeological discovery in centuries. The first exploration teams entered the ruins the following morning, with Isolde and Prince Kieran leading a group that included Master Corwin and several other scholars. The buildings appeared empty at first glance, but closer examination revealed intricate carvings and murals that depicted scenes of magical practice on a scale that dwarfed anything from their current era. "Look at this," Master Corwin called from near one of the walls. These inscriptions describe what appears to be a civilization built entirely around magical symbiosis, different types of magic wielders working in harmony to maintain vast environmental systems. Isolde studied the carvings he had indicated, her enhanced magical senses allowing her to perceive details that others might miss. "It's not just describing cooperation," she said slowly. "It's showing how different magical affinities were deliberately balanced to create stable, sustainable systems. Fire magic paired with water magic, earth magic balanced by air magic. Complementary opposites, Prince Kieran added, understanding dawning in his voice. Like what happened with our curses, but on a massive scale involving entire populations. As they moved deeper into the complex, the pattern became clearer. The ancient civilization had discovered how to pair magic wielders with complementary abilities, creating stable bonds that enhanced both individuals while contributing to larger magical frameworks. The city itself was designed around these partnerships, with living spaces and work areas arranged to facilitate ongoing magical cooperation. This changes everything we thought we knew about magical history, Master Corwin said excitedly. If this civilization developed sustainable magical practices, if they found ways to prevent the kind of magical conflicts that led to the Great Purge. His words were cut short by a sudden pulse of energy from the central dome. The aurora light that had been gently rhythmic suddenly flared brighter, and they could feel a resonance that seemed to respond to their presence. Isolde grabbed Prince Kieran's hand instinctively, their magical connection helping to stabilize them against whatever force was awakening around them. "We need to get to that dome," Isolde said urgently. "Whatever's happening, it's connected to why these ruins became active after our transformation." The central structure proved to be more than just a building. It was a massive magical focus, designed to collect and channel energy from across the entire complex. As they approached its entrance, symbols carved into the ground began to glow in response to their footsteps. The dome itself was translucent, allowing them to see a chamber within that contained what appeared to be a pool of liquid starlight. "It's some kind of scrying system," Prince Kieran realized as they entered the dome. But instead of showing distant places, it's showing possibilities. The pool's surface rippled without any physical disturbance, displaying images that shifted and changed like living dreams. They saw their own kingdom as it had been during the eternal winter, then as it was now, then as it might become under different circumstances. They saw other kingdoms facing magical crises similar to what they had experienced. They saw potential futures where magical cooperation flourished, and others where it led to devastating conflicts. "It's responding to our magical signature," Isolde observed, kneeling beside the pool. "Our transformation created a resonance that this system was designed to detect and respond to," added a new voice from behind them. They spun around to see a figure emerging from what had appeared to be an empty alcove. The woman was tall and graceful, with silver hair and eyes that held depths of knowledge accumulated over centuries. Her clothing was simple but bore the unmistakable signs of magical enhancement, and the air around her shimmered with barely contained power. "Who are you?" Lord Commander Aldrich demanded, his hand moving to his sword hilt despite the obvious futility of threatening someone who radiated such magical potency. "I am Lirelei, Keeper of the Convergence," the woman replied calmly. "I have been waiting here for nearly 300 years for someone to achieve the kind of magical synthesis that would awaken this facility." "Waiting?" Princess Alara stepped forward carefully. "You've been here all this time?" "Time flows differently within the Convergence," Lirelei explained. "When the last of the great partnerships ended and the magical wars began, we keepers retreated to these places to preserve the knowledge of balanced magic until it could be safely restored to the world." Master Corwin's scholarly excitement overcame his caution. The civilization that built this place, they weren't destroyed by magical conflict. They chose to withdraw. They chose to prepare for a future when their wisdom would be needed again, Lirelei corrected. "The cycles of magical understanding rise and fall like tides. We entered an age of fear and suppression, but we knew that eventually, someone would rediscover the principles of magical symbiosis." Isolde felt a chill of understanding. "Our transformation, it wasn't unique. It was part of a pattern that you'd been watching for centuries. Your love broke curses that should have been impossible to break," Lirelei confirmed. "But more than that, it demonstrated that magical opposites could achieve harmony without destroying each other. That knowledge has awakened resonance points throughout the world, places where similar transformations are now possible." "Similar transformations?" Prince Kieran's voice carried a mixture of hope and concern. "You mean there are others like us?" "There are others who could become like you, given proper guidance and understanding." Lirelay gestured to the scrying pool, which now showed images of individuals across the known world magic wielders struggling with their own afflictions, cursed or exiled or hiding from persecution. The knowledge of magical partnership can spread, but only if those who have achieved it are willing to teach others. The implications were staggering. They were being offered the chance to fundamentally change how magic was understood and practiced throughout their world. But with that opportunity came responsibility on a scale that neither Isolde nor Prince Kieran had ever imagined. What would this teaching involve? Isolde asked carefully. Establishing centers of learning where complementary magic wielders can find each other and learn to work in harmony, Lirelay explained. Developing techniques for identifying compatible magical affinities. Most importantly, changing the culture of fear that has driven magic underground for so long. That would require cooperation from the existing kingdoms, Princess Ilara pointed out. Many rulers had built their power on the suppression of magic. They won't willingly surrender that control. Which is why the transformation must come from within, Lirelay replied. As more partnerships succeed, as the benefits of magical cooperation become undeniable, the old systems will be forced to adapt or become obsolete. Lord Commander Aldrich had been listening with growing unease. You're talking about revolution disguised as education. The existing order won't tolerate such challenges to their authority. The existing order is already failing, Lirelay said bluntly. Look around you. 7 kingdoms barely managing to maintain stability, while magical potential goes unused and magical problems go unsolved. How many communities had been lost to curses that could have been broken? With proper knowledge? How many conflicts had been fought that magical cooperation could have prevented? As if to emphasize her point, the scrying pool shifted to show scenes of current crises throughout the 7 kingdoms' droughts that earth and water mages working together could end. Plagues that healing magic could cure if it weren't suppressed. Infrastructure projects that earth shapers could complete in days rather than years. The question, Lirelay continued, is whether you're willing to accept the responsibility that comes with your achievement. Your successful transformation has opened a door that cannot be closed. Others will seek you out, hoping to find what you have found. You can guide that process, or you can let it happen chaotically with all the dangers that implies. Isolde and Prince Kieran exchanged a long look, communicating through their magical bond in ways that words couldn't convey. They had sought only to break their own curses and save their kingdom. But their actions had apparently set in motion changes that would affect the entire world. If we agree to help, Prince Kieran said finally, what safeguards exist to prevent this knowledge from being misused? Magical partnerships powerful enough to reshape geography could also be turned to conquest or domination. The same safeguards that prevented you from misusing your abilities, Lirelay replied. True magical partnership requires emotional harmony as well as magical compatibility. It cannot be forced or faked. The resonance simply doesn't occur without genuine caring between the participants. And if partnerships form between people with malicious intent, then they face the same risks you face, that their connection will amplify their flaws rather than balancing them. Cruelty resonating with cruelty creates destruction that consumes itself. Only partnerships based on love, trust, and mutual support create stable, beneficial magic. Master Corwin had been examining the inscriptions around the dome's perimeter during this conversation. There are protocols here, he announced. Detailed procedures for establishing training centers, for identifying compatible individuals, for managing the transition from isolated practice to partnership magic. This isn't theoretical. It's a complete system that was developed and tested over centuries. A system that was deliberately preserved against the day it would be needed again, Lirelay confirmed. But it can only be implemented by those who have already proven its validity through their own transformation. The weight of decision settled over them like a physical presence. They could return to their kingdom and live quietly with their transformed circumstances, allowing the broader implications to unfold without their direct involvement, or they could accept the role being offered to them and become active agents in reshaping how magic was understood throughout their world. How many others are there? Isolde asked. How many keepers like you, waiting in hidden places? 17 sites remain active, scattered across the continents. Each keeper maintains knowledge of different aspects of magical partnership. Some specialize in elemental harmonies, others in mental or emotional magics, still others in the theoretical frameworks that make all Bedana partnerships possible. And they're all waiting for people like us to find them? They're waiting for the signal that the time of restoration has begun. Your transformation provided that signal. Now they're preparing to emerge and offer their knowledge to those ready to receive it. Princess Alara had been silent during much of this exchange, but now she spoke with the authority of someone accustomed to making difficult political decisions. This conversation has moved far beyond the scope of Fricker. Our original mission. We need time to consult with our respective kingdoms before making commitments that could affect the entire region. Of course, Lirelei agreed, but understand that delay carries its own risks. Knowledge of what happened here will spread, as will knowledge of the other awakening sites. Others may reach them first, others who might not share your commitment to using this knowledge responsibly. The expedition spent 3 more days at the ruins, documenting what they could and learning what Lirelei was willing to teach them about the ancient magical systems, but the real work, they all understood, would begin when they returned to their respective kingdoms with news of what they had discovered. The journey back was subdued, each member of the party processing the implications of what they had learned. The political landscape they had known was about to change dramatically, and they would all play roles in determining whether that change brought progress, gain, or chaos. No matter what the other kingdoms decide, Isolde said to Prince Kieran as they approached their own borders, "We can't ignore what we've learned. There are people out there who need the kind of help we can provide." "I know," Prince Kieran replied, "but we also can't ignore the legitimate concerns about stability and security. If we move too quickly, we could trigger exactly the kind of magical conflicts that Lirelei's people withdrew to prevent. So we find a middle path. We start small, with individuals who seek us out rather than trying to change entire systems at once. We prove that magical partnerships can coexist with traditional governance rather than threatening it." The solution they developed over the following months was both practical and diplomatic. Rather than establishing formal training centers that might be seen as challenges to existing authority, they opened their palace to visitors seeking guidance with magical problems. Word spread quietly through networks of scholars and refugees that help was available for those willing to make the journey north. The first to arrive was a young woman named Bessa, whose pyrokinetic abilities had been slowly consuming her life force. Her village had cast her out before she could accidentally harm anyone, and she had been wandering for months looking for someone who might understand her plight. Working with her, Isolde and Prince Kieran discovered that her fire magic needed to be balanced with water or ice magic to become stable and sustainable. Finding Bessa a compatible partner proved more challenging than breaking her prepper curse. They sent word to Lirelei, who provided them with techniques for identifying individuals with complementary magical signatures. Within weeks, they were contacted by a traveling merchant whose ship had been plagued by storms for years. Storms that seemed to follow him specifically, suggesting water magic that was as out of control as Thessa's fire. The merchant, Marcus, was initially skeptical of the entire concept. He had spent his life suppressing his magical abilities, believing them to be nothing but trouble. But when he and Thessa met in the palace's carefully controlled environment, the resonance between their magics was immediately apparent. Working together, they could create controlled steam that had applications in everything from healing therapies to mechanical power. "It's remarkable," Marcus admitted after a week of guided practice. "I've spent 20 years afraid that my magic would destroy my livelihood, and now it might become the foundation for a completely new type of commerce." More visitors followed, drawn by stories of successful magical partnerships. A earth shaper whose abilities had been causing dangerous sinkholes found balance with a wind caller whose magic had been creating destructive tornadoes. Twin brothers whose opposing magical polarities had been making them violently ill discovered that their connection could generate healing energies that surpassed anything known to conventional medicine. Each success story spread the word further. But Isolde and Prince Kieran were careful to manage the process gradually. They established protocols for screening visitors, ensuring that those who came seeking help were genuinely committed to using their abilities constructively. They also maintained regular communication with the other kingdoms, sharing their findings and addressing concerns before they could escalate into conflicts. The key, Isolde explained to a gathering of scholars from all 7 kingdoms, is understanding that magical partnership isn't about accumulating power, it's about finding balance. Partnerships based on mutual support create stability, while those based on domination or exploitation inevitably fail. The research data they had accumulated supported this conclusion. Attempted partnerships between individuals with compatible magical signatures but incompatible personalities consistently resulted in magical feedback that was harmful to both participants. Only when emotional harmony accompanied magical compatibility did the partnerships achieve the kind of transformative success that had broken their original curses. As their work continued, they began to notice broader changes in how magic was perceived throughout the region. Villages that had once expelled magic wielders were now cautiously welcoming them back, hoping to benefit from abilities that were finally understood to be controllable. Kingdoms were beginning to explore how magical partnerships might address problems that conventional approaches had failed to solve. But with these changes came new challenges. Not everyone who sought magical partnership was motivated by altruistic goals. Some individuals attempted to use the techniques they taught to enhance their power for personal gain. Others tried to force partnerships with incompatible individuals, sometimes resulting in magical accidents that reinforced old fears about the dangers of unchecked magic. "We need better screening procedures," Prince Kieran concluded after a particularly difficult incident involving a would-be partnership that had resulted in a small explosion in one of the practice chambers. The knowledge we're sharing is powerful enough to be dangerous if misapplied. Working with Lorelei and the other awakened keepers, they developed more sophisticated methods for evaluating potential partnerships. Magical compatibility was necessary, but not sufficient emotional maturity, ethical commitment, and genuine desire for mutual support were equally important factors. The screening process became part of the teaching itself. Individuals seeking magical partnership were required to spend months in preparation, learning about themselves and their motivations as much as about magical theory. Those who weren't ready for true partnership were guided toward individual development practices that might prepare them for future opportunities. "The goal isn't to create as many partnerships as possible," Isolde explained to a group of new arrivals. "The goal is to create partnerships that will be stable, beneficial, and sustainable over time. That requires patience and careful preparation." 5 years after their first transformation, the effects of their work were becoming visible across the 7 kingdoms. Magical partnership centers had been established in each kingdom, with trained facilitators helping to identify and support compatible individuals. The economic benefits were becoming undeniable as magical cooperation addressed problems that had persisted for generations. Crop yields were increasing in areas where earth and water mages worked together to optimize growing conditions. Transportation was becoming more efficient as windcallers partnered with earth shapers to create smooth, protected roadways. Even military applications were being explored, with partnerships between defensive and offensive magical specialists proving more effective than individual magical combatants. "We're witnessing the beginning of a new age," Master Corwin observed during one of his regular research visits. "Not just magically, but socially and economically. The partnerships aren't just changing how magic works, they're changing how society works." But with this progress came growing pains. Traditional power structures were indeed being challenged as magical partnerships proved their value. Some rulers embraced the changes, while others resisted with increasing desperation. Political tensions were rising in several kingdoms as debates over magical policy intensified. "Change always creates instability," Princess Alara acknowledged during a diplomatic summit held at their palace. "The question is whether we can manage that instability constructively, or whether it will lead to the conflicts we're all trying to prevent." The summit brought together representatives from all 7 kingdoms to address the growing tensions around magical partnership. Some delegates wanted to regulate the practice more strictly, while others advocated for complete integration into their governmental and economic systems. Finding common ground required delicate negotiation and careful compromise. "Perhaps the solution is gradual integration," Isolde suggested. "Rather than trying to transform entire systems at once, we focus on specific problems that magical partnerships can solve. Let the benefits speak for themselves while traditional structures adapt at their own pace." The compromise they reached established a framework for managed magical cooperation. Partnerships would be officially recognized and supported, but their applications would be limited to specific approved areas initially. As trust and understanding grew, the restrictions could be gradually lifted. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it provided a path forward that most kingdoms could accept. More importantly, it established principles for managing the continued evolution of magical practice as their work expanded to include the other awakened sites and their keepers. Years continued to pass, and their original palace became the center of a network that spanned continents. Magical partnerships were no longer experimental curiosities, but accepted parts of society, contributing to prosperity and stability in ways that would have been unimaginable during the age of magical suppression. Isolde and Prince Kieran, now recognized as founders of the modern magical partnership movement, found their lives had evolved far beyond their original dreams. They were parents, teachers, researchers, and diplomats, their days filled with the complex challenges of managing beneficial change on a global scale. Do you ever miss the simplicity of just trying to break our own curses? Isolde asked Prince Kieran one evening as they reviewed reports from partnership centers across 3 kingdoms. Sometimes, he admitted. But then I think about all the people who have found what we found, the connection, the balance, the sense of belonging somewhere. How could we regret helping others discover that? Their own partnership had only grown stronger over the years, tested by challenges and enriched by shared purpose. They had learned to navigate the complexities of ruling a kingdom while advancing a magical revolution, of raising children while teaching others, of maintaining their personal connection while serving causes larger than themselves. The eternal winter that had once threatened to consume everything was now just a memory, replaced by seasons that turned as they should and a land that bloomed with possibilities. But more than the physical transformation, it was the human connections that truly marked their success, the network of partnerships that had grown from their example, proving that love and cooperation could indeed triumph over fear and isolation. Standing together on their balcony, watching the lights of their thriving kingdom spread below them, they knew their story was far from over. There were still challenges to face, still people to help, still boundaries to cross in pursuit of a world where magic and mundane life could coexist in harmony. The Ice Prince and his prisoner had become something new, architects of a future where cursed isolation was replaced by blessed connection, where individual power was transformed into shared strength, where the impossible had become not only possible but sustainable. Their love had indeed melted more than curses. It had melted the barriers between people, between kingdoms, between what was and what could be. The eternal winter was over, but the spring they had created would bloom forever. Yet even as their movement flourished, whispers began to reach them of disturbances in the far eastern territories, beyond the mapped borders of the 7 kingdoms. Ships returning from trading expeditions spoke of strange phenomena islands that appeared and disappeared with the tides. Storms that raged with unnatural colors, and most troubling of all, reports of people who seemed to be stuck between human and something else entirely. Captain Jorik Stormwind was the first to bring concrete evidence of these anomalies. His merchant vessel had been blown off course during what should have been a routine voyage to the Sapphire Archipelago, when they encountered a floating city that existed partially in their world and partially in what he could only describe as somewhere else. The buildings were there, solid as anything, he reported to the assembled council in their great hall, his weathered hands shaking slightly as he spoke. But when you looked at them from the corner of your eye, they seemed to shift, like they were made of crystallized dreams. And the people... He paused, struggling with words adequate to describe what he had witnessed. They looked human from a distance, but up close you could see they were changing into something new. Not cursed exactly, but transformed in ways I'd never seen. Isolde felt a chill of premonition that had nothing to do with temperature. Did they seem to be suffering? Were they in distress? That's the strangest part, Captain Stormwind replied. They seemed content, happy even, like they had found something they had been searching for their entire lives. But when I tried to speak with them, they responded in harmonies instead of words, as if individual conversation had become impossible for them. End quote. Prince Kieran leaned forward, his expression grave. How many people were affected? the entire population of what must have once been a normal trading port. Hundreds of souls, all transformed into something that existed between human and the... He gestured helplessly. I don't have words for what they were becoming. Master Corwin, now permanently stationed at their court to oversee the magical partnership research, looked up from the notes he had been frantically scribbling. This sounds like magical evolution taken to an extreme. If our partnerships represent controlled magical transformation, what you're describing might be uncontrolled collective transformation. The implications were staggering. Their work had been based on the principle that magical partnerships provided balance and stability, preventing the kind of runaway magical development that had historically led to disasters. But if entire communities were spontaneously undergoing radical transformation, it suggested that the awakening they had triggered was having effects far beyond what they had anticipated. We need to investigate this directly, Isolde declared, though the prospect filled her with dread. If our actions have somehow triggered uncontrolled magical evolution, we have a responsibility to understand and potentially intervene. It could be dangerous, Prince Kieran warned. If these transformations are as radical as described, exposure to them might affect us as well. Then we'll take precautions. But we can't ignore the possibility that we've set in motion changes we don't fully understand. Preparations for the Eastern expedition took months, as they assembled a team capable of investigating magical phenomena while protecting themselves against unknown transformative effects. Unlike their previous journey to the ancient ruins, this expedition would venture into completely uncharted territory where normal maps and navigation methods might prove useless. Weirley agreed to accompany them, bringing knowledge of ancient protective techniques that might shield them from unwanted magical influence. Several of their most successful magical partnerships also volunteered, their combined abilities providing defensive capabilities that individual magic wielders could never achieve. The voyage began normally enough, following established trade routes toward the Eastern Ocean. But as they moved beyond the familiar shipping lanes, the very nature of reality seemed to become more fluid. Compass readings became unreliable, stars appeared in unfamiliar configurations, and the ocean itself took on qualities that defied natural explanation. "Look at the water," called Mira, one of their wing-collar partners, pointing over the ship's rail. It's not reflecting the sky anymore. Indeed, the ocean surface had become like a mirror showing not the clouds above, but glimpses of other places, forests of silver trees, cities built from clouds, landscapes that seemed to exist in perpetual sunset. The effect was beautiful but deeply unsettling, suggesting they were traveling through regions where the boundaries between different realities had become permeable. "We're entering a confluence zone," Lirelei explained, her ancient eyes reflecting knowledge accumulated over centuries. "Places where multiple dimensional layers intersect. They're rare and usually unstable, but the magical awakening you triggered may have created new ones or strengthened existing ones." On the 4th day of their voyage, they encountered their first transformed community. What Captain Stormwind had described as a floating city proved to be something far more complex, a collection of structures that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions, their inhabitants moving freely between different layers of reality. The people who greeted them were indeed no longer entirely human, but neither were they diminished by their transformation. They had become something more, beings capable of perceiving and interacting with multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. Their communication was indeed harmonic, but it conveyed far more information than conventional speech, sharing emotions and concepts directly rather than through the imperfect medium of words. "Welcome, architects of awakening," their spokesperson harmonized, the sounds creating visible patterns in the air around her. "We have been expecting you since the resonance began." Isolde found she could understand the harmonic communication through her magical senses, though the experience was overwhelming. "You know why we're here? You seek to understand whether your gift of partnership has brought blessing or curse to our kind. The answer is both and neither. We have become what we were always meant to be, but the path was painful for those not prepared." Prince Kieran stepped forward carefully, maintaining the protective barriers their team had established. "Are there others like you? Other communities that have undergone similar transformations?" Across the eastern waters, reality itself grows fluid. Some embrace the change and evolve as we have. Others resist, suffer for their resistance. Still others find middle paths, changing partially while retaining aspects of their original nature. The transformed woman gestured toward the horizon where impossible structures shimmered in and out of existence. Your awakening of ancient magics has not just restored old knowledge, it has accelerated evolution itself. Magic seeks new expressions, new forms of existence that transcend the limitations your kind has. Always accepted. Over the following days, they encountered numerous communities in various states of transformation. Some had achieved harmonious evolution like the first group, becoming beings of expanded consciousness and capability. Others were trapped in painful transition states, neither fully human nor successfully transformed into something greater. Most disturbing were the communities that had attempted to resist the changes entirely, only to find themselves slowly dissolving as their rejection of evolution made their existence increasingly unstable. The pattern is clear, Master Corwin observed as they documented their findings. Magical awakening creates pressure for evolution. Communities that adapt successfully thrive in new forms, while those that resist face dissolution. The question is whether this represents a natural progression or a catastrophe we need to prevent. Liralay's expression was thoughtful as she considered his words. Both perspectives had merit. From the standpoint of your current existence, these transformations represent radical change that threatens familiar ways of life. But from a longer view, they may represent necessary adaptation to new magical realities. End quote. What about choice? Isolde demanded. These people didn't choose to undergo radical transformation. It was imposed on them by forces they couldn't control. Was your own transformation truly chosen? Liralay countered gently. You acted to break curses that were killing you and your kingdom. The specific nature of your transformation was not something you could predict or control, yet you adapted and found blessing in the change. The philosophical implications kept them debating long into each night, but the practical concerns were equally pressing. Reports from their homeland indicated that similar transformation pressures were beginning to manifest in areas with high concentrations of magical partnerships. So far, the changes were subtle, enhanced empathic connections between partners, occasional glimpses of alternate possibilities, minor reality fluctuations around highly successful partnerships. We need to return, Prince Kieran decided after a week of investigation. Our people need to understand what might be coming and prepare for it. And we need to determine whether these evolutionary pressures can be guided rather than simply endured. The journey home was faster than their outward voyage, as if reality itself was eager to return them to familiar dimensional stability. But they carried with them knowledge that would fundamentally change how they understood their work and its consequences. The partnerships we've been facilitating aren't just changing individual lives, Isolde realized as they approached their own borders. They're changing what it means to be human in a world where magic is awakening. The transformation pressures they had witnessed in the Eastern Territories began manifesting in their homeland within months of their return. The changes were subtle at first, magical partners developing enhanced empathic connections that sometimes included brief moments of shared consciousness. Children born to magical partnerships showed abilities that transcended their parents' individual magics, creating new forms of magical expression that had never been documented before. Evolution is accelerating, reported Dr. Phelan, the physician they had assigned to monitor the health effects of magical partnership. Not just magically, but physically and mentally as well. Partners are becoming more than the sum of their individual capabilities. The phenomenon created both excitement and anxiety throughout their kingdom. Some people embraced the possibility of evolutionary advancement, while others feared losing their essential humanity. The political implications were enormous. As neighboring kingdoms began questioning whether magical partnerships represented beneficial cooperation or dangerous transformation pressure. We need new frameworks for understanding what we're becoming, Isolde declared during an emergency council session. The old categories of human and magical, individual and partnership, are no longer adequate. Working with Liralay and the other awakened keepers, they began developing comprehensive protocols for managing evolutionary transformation. The key insight was that resistance to change often made it more traumatic, while conscious participation in the process allowed for more controlled and beneficial outcomes. Think of it as guided evolution, Lorelei explained to a gathering of magical partners from across their kingdom. The awakening of ancient magics has created pressure for change that cannot be stopped, only directed. You can choose to participate consciously in your own transformation, or you can allow it to happen unconsciously with potentially chaotic results. The protocols they developed included meditation techniques for maintaining consciousness during transformation, magical exercises for expanding awareness gradually rather than suddenly, and support systems for individuals and partnerships undergoing evolutionary changes. Most importantly, they established the principle of informed consent. No one would be pressured to undergo transformation, but those who chose it would receive comprehensive preparation and support. The goal isn't to create a new species, Prince Kieran emphasized during public presentations about their findings. The goal is to help those who are changing to do so safely and consciously, while preserving the right of others to maintain their current forms of existence. Implementation of the protocols proved challenging, as different communities had varying tolerance for change and different capacities for conscious transformation. Some magical partnerships embraced guided evolution eagerly, developing new forms of consciousness that transcended individual identity while maintaining personal autonomy. Others preferred to limit their changes to enhanced magical abilities while preserving their essential humanity. The diversity of outcomes became a strength rather than a weakness, as different approaches to transformation proved suitable for different individuals and circumstances. Some partnerships evolved into collective consciousnesses capable of perceiving multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. Others developed enhanced empathy and communication abilities while remaining fundamentally human. Still others found middle paths that combined expanded awareness with familiar forms of existence. We're not creating uniformity, Isolde observed as she watched a group of evolved partnerships working together on a complex magical project. We're creating diversity, new forms of existence that expand the possibilities for conscious life, rather than replacing existing ones. Children born into this evolving society showed the most remarkable adaptations. They seemed naturally capable of navigating multiple dimensional layers, communicating empathically with both transformed and untransformed individuals, and developing magical abilities that combined elements from their parents' partnerships in novel ways. They're not just learning about transformation, noted Master Elena, who had been appointed to study the educational needs of these evolved children. They're intuitively understanding how to exist comfortably across different states of being. They may represent the future of conscious evolution. As news of their society's transformation spread beyond their borders, delegations arrived from across the known world seeking to understand and potentially replicate their achievements. Some came as students, hoping to learn techniques for conscious evolution. Others came as observers, documenting the changes for academic or political purposes. A few came as critics, arguing that the transformations represented dangerous deviation from natural human development. The question we face, Prince Kieran addressed the assembled delegates, is not whether these changes should occur. They're already occurring throughout the magically awakened regions. The question is whether they occur chaotically or consciously, harmfully or beneficially. The evidence from their controlled transformation protocols was compelling. Communities that embraced guided evolution showed lower rates of transformation trauma, greater satisfaction with their evolved states, and better integration between transformed and untransformed populations. Those that resisted or ignored the evolutionary pressures faced higher rates of psychological distress, social fragmentation, and in extreme cases, reality dissolution. Conscious participation in one's own evolution isn't just beneficial, Dr. Phelan reported to the International Medical Conference they hosted. It appears to be necessary for successful adaptation to the new magical realities. Resistance to change doesn't prevent it, it just makes it more difficult and potentially harmful. The success of their protocols led to requests for assistance from kingdoms across 3 continents. Transformation centers were established in major cities, staffed by trained facilitators who could guide individuals and partnerships through conscious evolution processes. Each center was adapted to local cultural and magical conditions, ensuring that transformation respected existing traditions while enabling necessary adaptation. We're witnessing the birth of a new phase of human development, Isolde observed during one of their regular consultations. Not the replacement of humanity, but its expansion into forms of existence that were previously impossible. The relationship between Isolde and Prince Kieran continued to evolve as well, their original magical partnership deepening into something that transcended individual identity while preserving their essential selves. They could share consciousness when needed for complex magical work, yet maintain separate personalities and individual agency. Their love had become a living force that enhanced both of their capabilities while creating new possibilities for connection and understanding. I never imagined when we first touched hands in that conservatory that we were beginning a transformation that would affect the entire world, Isolde mused one evening as they watched aurora lights dance across their Costher Bay, transformed kingdom. Perhaps that's what made it possible, Prince Kieran replied, taking her hand in his as they had countless times before. If we had understood the scope of what we were beginning, we might have been too frightened to take the first step. Their children, now approaching adolescence, represented a new generation that had never known a world without magical partnerships and conscious evolution. They navigated between dimensions as easily as walking, between rooms, communicated empathically without conscious effort, and displayed magical abilities that combined elements from multiple traditions in ways that created entirely new forms of magical expression. They're not better than us, Isolde observed as she watched her daughter teaching younger children how to perceive dimensional layers. They're different, adapted to realities that we're still learning to navigate. They represent possibilities we're still discovering. The educational systems they developed for these evolved children became models for institutions across the awakened world. Rather than forcing uniform development, the curricula celebrated diversity while teaching skills for navigating multiple states of consciousness and reality. Children learn to appreciate both their evolved capabilities and their connection to their untransformed heritage. Education becomes exploration when the boundaries of possibility are constantly expanding, noted Master Elena during a conference on evolutionary pedagogy. These children aren't just learning established knowledge, they're discovering new forms of existence and understanding. As the years passed, their kingdom became a living laboratory for conscious evolution, attracting researchers, spiritual seekers, and those simply curious about the possibilities for human development. The careful balance they maintained between transformation and tradition allowed them to serve as a bridge between the changing and unchanged worlds. We've become something unprecedented, Prince Kieran reflected during their 10th wedding anniversary celebration. Not just a kingdom, but a community that demonstrates how love and conscious choice can guide evolution toward beneficial outcomes. The celebration itself exemplified their achievement, beings in various states of transformation gathering together in harmony, sharing experiences across dimensional layers, creating beauty through collaborative consciousness while maintaining individual identity and choice. It was a vision of possibility that continued to inspire communities throughout the awakened world. Yet challenges remained. Not all evolutionary attempts succeeded, and they continued to research better methods for supporting those who struggled with transformation. Some individuals found themselves caught between states, unable to complete their evolution but unable to return to their original forms. Others developed abilities they couldn't control, requiring ongoing support and sometimes protective isolation. Evolution is not a destination but a process, Isolde reminded them during one of their research meetings. Success isn't measured by achieving a particular form but by maintaining conscious participation in ongoing change while preserving what is truly essential about conscious existence. Their work expanded to include techniques for helping those stuck in incomplete transformations, methods for supporting individuals who chose to reverse or modify their evolutionary changes, and frameworks for creating communities that could accommodate beings across the full spectrum of consciousness and capability. The goal has always been expansion of choice rather than enforcement of change, Isolde emphasized during a gathering of transformation facilitators from across the awakened regions. We enable possibility while preserving agency. We support those who choose to evolve while respecting those who choose stability. The wisdom they developed became the foundation for what historians would later call the Conscious Evolution Accords, international agreements governing how transformation technologies and techniques would be shared, implemented. The accords ensured that evolutionary opportunities remained available to all, while preventing coercion or unwilling transformation. "We've learned to guide evolution without controlling it," Prince Kieran announced during the signing ceremony. "To enable transformation while preserving choice. To expand possibility while maintaining stability for those who need it." Standing together before the assembled representatives of the evolved world, Isolde and Prince Kieran reflected on the journey that had brought them from isolated, cursed individuals to architects of conscious evolution. Their love had indeed been the catalyst for transformation beyond their wildest imaginings, proving that the connections between conscious beings could reshape not just individual lives, but the very nature of existence itself. The Ice Prince and his prisoner had become something unimaginable guides for a species learning to direct its own evolution. Demonstrators of how love could transform not just personal curses, but the fundamental constraints on what conscious life could become. Their story continued to unfold, each day bringing new discoveries about the possibilities that opened when beings chose to evolve together, rather than remain isolated in familiar limitations. Their kingdom thrived as a beacon of conscious transformation, showing the world that evolution could be a choice rather than an accident, a gift rather than a threat, a celebration of expanded possibility rather than a loss of essential humanity. The eternal winter was not just over, it had been transformed into an eternal spring of consciousness that would bloom across dimensions for generations yet to come.